You do this with all your people that you interview?
I do. Usually I have a cameraman with me, so this is actually the first interview I think I've ever done just by myself. So, but I know how to do them. It's actually quite nice. So.
Hello.
It's very easy. All I want you to do is tell me stories about, tell me where you were born and who your parents were.
My parents, well, sorry. My parents was Theodore Paul Holzhauser, whose father came with 5 brothers from Germany, Berlin, and they came through Ellis Island and were on the Marble Wall in Alice. And instead of spelling it like we had it, Holshouser, they spelled it Holzhauser. And they all moved to Cypress, Illinois. And the brothers branched out from there. Most of them were railroad. Some of them came to Texas. Some of them went to Florida. And my dad, railroad, went to Louisiana, where he met my mother. And my mother's name was Willie Catherine Blanchard. And she was born and raised in Plaquemine, Louisiana. And they got married. And my grandmother was quite unhappy about this because she said that mother married railroad trash. But the real reason was he was a damn Yankee that came from Illinois. And after I was born, well, then they got together with the whole family, and I was born in Plaquemine, Louisiana.
We'll go back to why did they change the spelling of the name?
Well, because it didn't sound so German, and it does sound German. It doesn't matter. The funny part about it, Christopher is the one that's on the wall, and it was his father. But the young man was a state representative from Houston, and it was spelled Holzhauser. So.
Well, explain that. I don't know what you're talking about. Who's Christopher?
Christopher was one of the brothers of my grandfather, and they migrated to Houston, and.
So do you know all the brothers' names?
I just know Christopher and my grandfather.
And your grandfather's name was?
Charles Alexandra.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So is that who my mom was named after?
Your mother was named after him, Charles.
Oh, cool. So you were born when? Tell me when you were born. And
a long time ago.
We all know.
Yeah.
So well
yeah. Okay. February the 7th, 1927.
Okay.
I'm a product of the Depression. Now, we didn't feel the Depression like some families did because Dad worked for the railroad and he got paid every 2 weeks. And the railroad furnished our house and a car, everything. And but I was 5 when Dad had enough of the Southern living, and he left the Louisiana Division on Friday, and on Monday he went to work for the Texas and Pacific out of Dallas. Now, how we got to Dallas was they called it an outfit car, and it was a retired presidential car. It was all red velvet. It was beautiful. Had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and they brought a car in the back, a box car, and they put all of our furniture in it, and the next car they put the rest of the furniture in our car, and took us and put us on a track in Dallas, Texas, by the orphanage home there, Buckner's Orphanage. And we stayed there. Dad was to take over there, but the man decided not to move, so then they sent us to Sulphur Springs, right out of Texarkana, and we lived in the section houses there in the railroad, and we stayed there about a year, and I was 6 when we moved from there. But the well went wrong, and Dad was sick, Mom was sick, and Leela was sick with malaria. I never got sick. And my grandmother Holshouser came and took care of us. And so what they did was move the boxcars back on, put everything on it. They put us in a private car because they were so sick. They brought them in on stretchers, and they moved us to Watauga, right out of Fort Worth. And there I went to first grade, and had in a little school in Watauga. And now they have a beautiful high school, elementary, and middle school. But this little school had 3 rooms, and it went through the 9th grade. The first was 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and then 4th, 5th, and 6th, and 7th, 8th, and 9th in the 3 rooms. And that's where I went to my first year.
So, just back up a minute when you were saying that you guys, when you were leaving Louisiana and coming to Texas, you talk about that train car a little. What was that like? I mean, where did you live before you moved to live in the presidential train car? What was
in Louisiana?
Yeah, and I mean, can you just tell me what that was like to move? I can't imagine that where you lived was as nice as this presidential train car.
It wasn't.
Yeah, so
it wasn't. Plaquemine, Louisiana. Now, my dad's sister, Esther, you want to hear about the family? My dad's sister, Esther, was a nurse in a little hospital. If you're ever in Plaquemine, Louisiana, you can go by there, and it says the old hospital. And they had a beautiful home there, and we had a house there. And but it was a shotgun house, as I remember. I was 5, so I remember. And and anyway, we stayed there, and she lived there. And my dad had a sister named Esther. He had an older sister that my grandfather had. First wife had died, and Reba was her name. And then he had Ralph, Alan, Jean, 3 brothers and these 2 sisters. But Ralph, but 3 had died at birth. So my grandmother never went to the hospital, never had a doctor, just gave birth. Well, now that's pioneer, honey. I want no part of that.
Why? Why do you say that?
Why do I say that? I never had any trouble giving birth. Kathy was 3 hours. Susie was 5 minutes, and Debbie was 45 minutes. Get this thing over with, honey. I don't ever want to do it again.
Well, I don't think you have to.
No, I don't think so. I could go down the book of... It's a miracle.
So, okay, but you never described... Oh, you lived... So when you moved from the shotgun house... shack into shotgun style house into
and that was very popular back in those days.
Well, they were designed
You went into the living room and the bedroom and the kitchen. And the kitchen had the dining room, and it was all one, and a pump for the water.
And so how did you feel? Like, did you think, wow, my life changed? Or did you,
No, I loved it. I loved the adventure of it. I loved getting on that being in that outfit car that was so beautiful, and I think my mother was pulling her hair out because she had 2 kids. Oh, and then we didn't have any place to play. You cannot play on the railroad track. So they moved a boxcar in, and Leela and I skated in this boxcar, and we played, and we had our own private playground.
What would you play with?
Well, Leela played with dolls and houses, and a dollhouse she had.
What'd you play with?
Oh, balls, and bounced them up against the wall. Hell, I didn't want to play no doll. That was just a little bit beneath my... So, and I imagine I got in a lot of trouble.
For what?
Anything. It didn't matter.
Do you remember getting in trouble for anything specific? Like, do you remember the worst spanking you got, or?
Oh, I got spanked, honey, from Louisiana to Fort Worth. Mother had a strap, and I threw it away all the time. It would, when we moved from Louisiana to Texas, and you must remember we drove our car from there, and the roads were terrible. They were just ruts. I threw the thing out, and it hung on the bumper of the car. And when she got there was a strap. Well, I got it for that. And then we moved into Watauga and lived in section houses. Now, Dad moved some of his workers from Texarkana with him, and they were black, and they lived in the adjoining houses there. And the house, those section houses, which they don't have anymore, were yellow and black. And inside, from the ceiling, they were 11-foot ceiling, and they were all gray. And the floor was gray, and everything in there was gray. I can remember that. And I had a bad time of, if you didn't do what I wanted to do, I'll just leave. I remember that very clearly. The last time I left was a lesson. You want to hear this? My mother said something, and I didn't like it, and I said, "Well, good, I'll just leave." And she fixed me a little cloth and tied it on a stick and said, "Go." Well, I was barefooted. I used to go barefoot. I never go barefooted anymore. And if you've never walked on cross ties, hot, it was hot. The gravel was hot. The rail was hot. And I was just stomping down. That's mad. And then it dawned on me, fool, everybody else is at home and you're walking on this and your feet are burning, and I'll just not do this. I won't run away. So I turned around and went back home. They wouldn't let me in. It was hot afternoon, and they decided to make hot fudge, and I love fudge. And I even tried that I'm just a little girl and you're letting me out. Well, good for you. And I never cry. I'm not a crier. I just thought, well, I'll cry. Well, it didn't do any good either. So I had to sit there till 5 o'clock. And this was in the morning when I ran off. And my dad came home. And I knew my buddy had let me in. He just acted like I wasn't sitting on that porch. Walked in, locked the door, and I sat out there till 9 o'clock. And they finally opened up, and the last time I run away, I thought, I can be smarter than this. I'll work it out. That's so.
Do you remember, like, when did you first realize how hard-headed you were, or how much you wanted your own way? I mean,
The day I was born, honey.
The day you were born, what?
I didn't realize that I had a right to my opinion.
And what do you think shaped that? Or how do you think you got that way?
I don't know. I just always, I think every individual has a right to their opinion. Now, I may not agree with you, and that's okay. And you may not agree with me, but at least honor my opinion. And I will not change. That is, that's why it was important to me that women had equal rights, and we didn't.
And how did that affect you? I mean, like, tell me an example of when you didn't have an equal right.
Well,
I can remember being discriminated against.
It never occurred to me until, because I went to work when I was 13 at the theater, and I made $5 a week. But the boy that was working with me was making $7 a week. And he was doing the same. Oh, hey, wait a minute, this is not right. Well, he's a boy. That's when it stuck. And I thought, sooner or later, I'm going to get you good. So I think when I got married and I had a chance in Smithfield, Texas, which is no more. It's now Hearst, Euless, and Bedford, but there used to be a Smithfield. And I could buy acres for, pardon me, acres for $15 an acre. And I went to buy it, and they said I couldn't buy it because I was a female. And my husband was overseas, and he couldn't buy it. I mean, we couldn't get it. So I lost out, and that's North Richland Hills now. I could have made a mint, but this was the first time.
Okay, so...
You want to know my mother's family?
Sure.
My mother's family was Nellie because my grandfather, Blanchard, was married before. And he had Nellie, and his wife died. And then he married my grandmother, and she had Lizzie. Her name was Elizabeth, but they called her Lizzie. She married Lloyd Bates. Her name was Bates later. And then Alfred and Alan and my mother. Is she leaving us?
Would it help you if you had something warm for your throat?
Yeah.
Do you want some coffee?
Yeah.
You want a coffee or hot tea?
Hot tea would be a bit.
Yeah, I'm taking a key to your room.
Okay.
Anyway,
Do you have money, Joel? Okay.
what else?
You were telling me you're on a nanny side of the family. You just had named her brothers and sisters, I think.
And that's when she married Dad, and we moved to Texas. But we always had relatives coming and staying with us and visiting us. And
Yeah, and how often did y'all go back to Louisiana?
well, we could ride free on the train. See, so we went back a lot. But every once in a while, Dad would want the car there. And so we would go. But the roads were terrible. I remember huge ruts in the road and mud. If it rained, you just couldn't go. And Louisiana had the worst roads. And
Can you talk about that a little? Because I think a lot of people don't. I mean, everyone takes for granted that there's an interstate system.
it was no interstate system, and you had to go. And I'm not for sure where it was, but it's called Ferryville. And we had, and I think that's why to this day I'm afraid of water. We had levees that kept the Mississippi River back, and one time in Plaquemine the levee broke, and it flooded a lot of houses, and Grandpa had some houses there that was rent houses. So he put me in a rowboat with him, and we went and touched the top, and the boat would rock. It scared me to death. And I think I was, 5? Before we ever moved to Texas. And then one time we were going home and back to Louisiana from Fort Worth, and we went to Ferryville to cross. It was the Red River that we had to cross, and it roared. And the Chaffalai roared, and all those rivers are very dangerous. And we got on this ferry pulled by a tugboat, and the tugboat, it broke. The chain broke, and we went going down. I was scared to death, and I think that's why I'm so scared of water. And Leela was afraid of water. Leela was a little girl too. And
when you would go back to Plaquemine, what would y'all do?
Well, Leela would stay with the Blanchards, and I would go with the Holtz houses because they were more colorful, and I loved it over there.
How were they colorful?
Well, my other aunt, Reba, had a beautiful two-storied home. It was just but I remember my mother saying, "You, young lady, will stay in Plaquemine with the Blanchards. I do not want you in Baton Rouge with the Holzhausers. Do I make myself clean?" Well, I just love this house. It was so pretty. There was a lot of girls in this house, and a lot of men would come to visit the girls, and I thought that was very nice. They had so many friends, And come to find out, my aunt was a madam. I never did know it until I was grown. They never mentioned it to me. I never thought to ask. I just had a good time. Now, did you want to know that? Okay.
And that's why Nanny knew, and that's why she didn't.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't going to go over there. Well, that's right where I headed for, We used to go to Biloxi when we go there in the summertime. And now, my mother's had Lizzie. I like to go to their house. They lived in Port Allen. It was right across the Mississippi from Baton Rouge. And my uncle was a ferry chief engineer over the ferries that went from Port Allen to Baton Rouge. That's before they built the bridge. And Loy Earl, the oldest one, was 9 months older than me, and we could have more fun together. But they were the meanest kids I've ever seen in my life. And my uncle was very straight and wore a captain's uniform and a cap, and he'd come walking. He came home to lunch every day, and he had always smoked a pipe hanging out of his mouth. And so I told Leela, I said, Leela, get out in the yard now. And Leela said, why do I get out in the yard, Leela? And so my uncle came up and took his pipe. We all went out in the yard and hit the post, and Loy Earl had sawed the post, and the whole roof came down, and he didn't do a thing but put his cap back on and straighten himself up and go in. And so I thought, well, that was over with, and we had to kind of walk around the roof, it was kind of down on the porch. And we were sitting there at the dining room table, and he took a fork and threw it at Loy Earl, and and we never had that at home, so that was interesting. And then Mother said that.
Sticking his fork?
And then he'd saw the legs off the chairs, and you never knew, when you got ready to sit down, you wanted to kind of watch that you could sit in that chair. He just loved to saw things up. Loy Earl was the most fascinating. I often wonder if he's still alive. I checked when I went through Mobile, and there wasn't any Bates there. So I don't know whether they moved on or he died or what. But he joined the Marines when he was 15. He told them he was 18, and he was at Guadalcanal and was hurt there. And
Wait, and how was he related?
Huh?
How was he related?
My mother's sister, Lizzie's oldest boy.
Okay. That's why he's got a Bates as a last.
Yeah. And so then when he came home, we'd go home during summer, and Loy Earl and my aunt would take us to New Orleans. Leela would stay over in Plaquemine, and Loy Earl and I would because he'd been in the Marines, honey. He was a real sharp guy, and we'd hit the French quarters, and dance. God, we used to dance down. Anyway, my mother said, none of my children have ever been to the French quarters. And I said, right, Mom, nor rode a motorcycle either. Which I did.
Who had a motorcycle?
Well, this little friend of mine had a motorcycle, and see, we were a mile and a half from school. And that's how we walked to school. We didn't have a car. Dad took it to work. So, yeah, that's how it was fun.
Well, that's why you're still alive today, because you walked when you were young.
Oh, yeah, a lot.
It's good for you.
Yeah.
And you were just about to say, and your mother said right after you talked about Loy Earl.
Oh, that we never we never went to the French quarters. She would not allow it. I said, right, you never did.
Okay, so then, all right, so now where are we? We got your mother's side, your father's side, and then we were, I think, okay, so you haven't moved you were in Watauga. So
Watauga.
So then, what grade did you get up in school there?
Okay, I just went through the first grade there.
And then what happened?
Yeah, and then we moved to the first house I ever lived in my life, and it was called Avenue F in Polly, which is now Rosedale. But it was Avenue F at the time. It was to me, that was the most beautiful home I ever lived in. Of course, the railroad paid for it, And we lived there through the second grade.
Describe that house. What was so beautiful about it?
Well, see, it wasn't a shotgun house, and it wasn't you went into the living room, and over to the right was the dining room, and behind the dining room was the kitchen, and then from the living room you went down a hall into the bathroom, and then there was 2 bedrooms. And I just thought that was wonderful.
And did you have a front yard and a backyard?
Front yard and a backyard, yeah. First time we had a real, and indoor toilet, because all this other time, those section houses, we had outdoor
you know, for me, just because I grew up, you know, watching TV and I saw how, like, you know, what Leave to Beaver families look like.
Yeah.
When you were little, how did you know how other people lived? I mean, like, you know, you knew you lived in a shotgun shack, and I mean, God, I keep calling it a shack. I don't mean to call it.
Well, it was.
But you know, I mean, like, what did you dream of living in? Like,
Well, I never-
always wanted to have a Leave It to Beaver family.
Yeah.
I never had that.
I know.
But what did you compare how your life was, and what did you want?
Well,
I mean, you know, was there a story that you knew, or did you see a neighbor, you know, like some little girl that you wish you were like her? You know what I mean?
I never did.
Yeah. I mean, what did you?
I never did, Jana. I never wished I was somebody else. And I still don't wish I was somebody. I have a wonderful life, and I have a lot of friends, and I like to go and I like to do things, and
Well, no, I know, but I'm not saying that you necessarily wanted to be them, but that you could aspire.
Sarah Jean was an only child, and she was my friend. And her grandmother lived next door to us in Haltom City, Miss Hawkins. And I often envied, if you're going to envy anybody, I envied Sarah Jean until all of a sudden, and because I had little sisters, and there wasn't much. My mother, I had to do a lot of work, let's put it that way. I mean, I took care of my sisters, and my mother didn't wash and stuff like that, and I got to do that. And my mother didn't iron, and I got to do that. Now, I did not cook. I stayed away from that cooking, and that's why I don't cook now. But anyway, what
And
else?
do you resent that she did that?
No. I never did. And when I was 13, Dad said, "It's time for you to get a life, honey. You're going to work, if you keep your grades up." I thought, well, oh boy, this is another world. And when Buddy was born, Margaret was born,
Hold on one second.
Huh?
Hold on one second. Let me just check something real quick.
well, honey, you're just the most, to say the least.
You came in at a good point, Joel. Just getting the Buddy.
Oh, good. I can't get any of them to answer their phones. I was just gonna check on Hannah.
Sleep.
What about Debbie?
Lindsay, nobody.
Maybe sleeping off her dirty nipple.
Dirty nipple.
Okay. Before my mother, we get to. Well, go ahead. You were going to say about my mom. You took care of her, I guess.
Teddy was born in 1935, and Dad wanted a boy. And so his name was Theodore Paul. And when Teddy was born, and I was in 1935, they named Teddy Theo Paula, and they call her Teddy, after my dad. Now, Teddy cried her whole life, even as an adult. And now she has the most ornery husband, and you may put this down, and she still cries a lot. That's all I have to say about her. Now, then we moved to, after we left Polly, that's where Teddy was born. We moved to Hattie Street, and I went to East Van Zandt in the 3rd grade. Now, and I'm going to tell this before we got to Buddy. And because my dad worked, this was Depression. I mean, we did not get any, and they didn't call it welfare then. I don't know, I can't remember what they called it, but they got,
Public assistance.
huh?
Public assistance.
I don't know. They got hot meals. And Leela and I walked 2 blocks home and had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which really irritated me when these kids were in there with a hot meal and I had to walk 2 blocks. And there was tar. I remember they were doing some tar on the thing, and I would take a hunk out and chew it. That's good. Tar's good to chew, I think, because we chewed it, and evidently we didn't die. So there, and so anyway, we one day it came on the air loudspeaker that all of these children, and I don't remember what they called them, would line up in the morning at 8 o'clock, and they were going to take us to take them to have their teeth fixed. So I kind of was in the hall when it was a 2-story old building, and they were all out there in the hall, and I just stood in the hall with them. They loaded us on a bus, and this tooth right here, they pulled it, and they filled it, and I thought 8 o'clock in the morning I'd be back by noon, right? No, 5 o'clock they got us back. My mother and dad had the police out. My mother had that strap in her hand, honey, and she hit me every bit of the way home, and I kept saying, "But I got my tooth filled." Anyway, that was just.
She didn't admire your.
She didn't. She never did like my ingenuity, and I thought it was great. Anyway, I imagine that. I bet I gave that poor woman an awful time. Anyway, then after that, they went to Birdville or Haltom City and bought that house, and
What house?
2525 Oakwood Terrace, and that's the house we moved into. And Dad added another room at my room, and then Dad said it was 1939, and that was the year The Wizard of Oz was made, and we were in Leela and I that summer were in Baton Rouge, and my Aunt Esther took us to see it. That fall when I came back to start to school, the Gone with the Wind was on, and I went to see that, and we also did something else in '39. Was Europe was in war with Germany, and we used to wrap bundles for Britain. I never will forget it. Every Saturday morning, we'd go down and we'd wrap gauze and things, and it was fun. And so anyway, Dad said one night, "Guess what? I'm going to get you a little buddy." And I said, "Really? Yeah, we're going to have us a little buddy come June. It's going to be a little buddy." So when little Buddy came home, her name was not Buddy, it was Charles Margaret. He named her Charles Margaret after his dad. And I said, "And here is your little buddy." And I just started calling her Buddy. And it stuck until she went to Dallas and then was known as Charlie, I think. I love that girl dearly. She was a handful.
Why? How was she? How?
Well, she had 2 children, and I never knew where she was, and I was tracking her constantly, and I still loved her.
Adult Buddy, you're talking about?
Yes, adult Buddy. She was a sweet little girl, though. She really was.
To go back to when you saw The Wizard of Oz. Tell me, what did you think of that? How old were you?
12.
Okay. And what was that like to see a movie like that?
Oh, I thought it was wonderful. It was our first Technicolor. See, because we had black and white movies, and this was in color. And oh, it was just, to me, I thought that was the most beautiful thing.
It's kind of interesting that that's Julie's favorite movie, and I until right now, I never thought, oh wow, that's the same year Mom was born.
Yeah, 39. She was born in 39. And we had the,
What? I think that's weird. That would be my favorite.
then we had Gone with the Wind. I think 5, and I was trying to think of the others. 5 of the greatest movies, classic movies, were made in '39. Yeah.
What you didn't go to Louisiana when Gone with the Wind came out, did you?
No, I was in Fort Worth. That morning I was bundling for Britain, and then Monda May Ellis, a friend of mine, and Sarah Jean and I went to see Gone with the Wind.
And so you didn't get your movie, you didn't start working at the theater yet. You hadn't worked. So you were 12 and you started working.
No, I was just, and then the next year I started working. I saw Gone with the Wind 21 times at the Haltom Theater. Yeah, we had it, 3 weeks.
Oh, Oh, because it was there when you worked.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a long movie.
I know it. I could stand there and mouth it, you know, after a while.
What was your favorite line?
I don't give a damn, Charlotte. Personally, I don't give a damn, Charlotte. That was the very end. And that was the first time a curse word had been said in the movies, you know. That was...
And so, I mean, is that a big deal? Was it that shocking? I mean,
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, that was, yeah. We'd had gangster movies and, you know, but never.
Was another movie that year made? The one where they're by the airplane?
Casablanca.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Did you like working at the movie theater, or how did you get that job?
I went up there and told them I was ready to go to work. And Mr. and Miss Anding on that theater, and she was very dignified. And I sold tickets. I checked, you know, we took the tickets, sold candy. We had to inventory the candy every time, and then at night when we closed, we had to inventory it again, and our money had to match. That meant we didn't eat any of that candy during the time. And then we had to pop popcorn, and then we ushered. Now, you understand that back in that time of year, 39 and 40, there was no air conditioning, not like we have air conditioning now. It was water coolers. And every time we had long streamers so that it would go through the whole, you know, and you were dripping wet the time you got through to make it cool. There was a group of people that raised pigs, and they would come in with pig smell, and Miss Anding would make us go down and pour disinfectant around their feet, and they just raise up their feet, you know. And she had a kid every year, and Mrs. Anding was so businesslike, and every Saturday afternoon she'd bring her flock of kids in, and she'd sit out there in the lobby and nurse one of them. And that just was horrifying to me. I mean, you just didn't do anything like that. So she said, have y'all ever thought of playing cards? I never will forget her saying that. They said, no, honey, we like sex better. That was the first time I'd ever heard anybody in public say sex, you know, and I thought, I like that lady. We'd rather have sex. Well, you could tell. God, I guess she had about 11 kids. I'm not kidding you, every year. Anyway.
Wait, who was she?
I'm not going to tell you the name, but I tell you, they're very wealthy to this day. They owned all that land out there that's North Richland Hills. And that's where their pig farm was. And now they went in and took a garbage collection thing. Honey, all of their children are very educated and very wealthy. And streets are named after them out there, and I used to pour disinfectant around their feet.
So is that the woman who owned? Was the woman husband and wife owned the theater?
Yes.
But the wife helped run it too.
Oh yeah.
So was she the first woman that you ever saw that was kind of like in a business?
Yeah.
I mean, did you admire her?
Yes, I did. I loved her. Yeah.
Did that inspire you in some
Yeah.
way?
Oh yeah. I thought she was great. Yeah. I really did.
All right. So now you're in high school.
Yeah.
Or so you went to school when you moved to 25 Oakwood Terrace. You were 12, right?
Mhm.
And then you started to go to school. And how was that different from? I mean, you guys had moved around so much.
Oh, I never had a birthday in the same spot till I was 12 years old. I mean, we'd move every year, you know, because the railroad would move us every year. Mm-hmm.
How do you think that kind of made you as a person moving that much?
I loved it. I mean, look at the new people you could see and the new things you could do, yeah.
But what do you think, how do you think that shaped your character?
Well, I have not the slightest idea, honey. I think a lot of people worked on my character, but it didn't do them any good. And so even to this day, I sit and listen to some of my children say what I do, and it's not what I do. And it doesn't change my mind either.
No,
I'm telling you that right now.
Wait, no, what I'm getting at is, you know, like, because we grew up that way, Julie and I, Mom moved us every 6 months.
Uh-huh.
So I'm very good at packing.
What?
I'm very good at packing suitcases.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you one more time. How do you think moving that much informed your character?
It formed my character. It made me more independent. I have never latched on to material things. I like to keep things of my own. I like neat things. And I think, but then when I don't have it, or I have a heartache or a heartbreak, I go to plan B always, because you can only do so much with plan A. And then when you see you're running up against a brick wall, you better get a hold of yourself and go to plan B, because you're not going to change plan A. And I think moving around and seeing different people, I lived most of my life in Fort Worth, and I went to Houston, and I never felt like I was a stranger in Houston. I mean, and I was. I mean, I came in there with not knowing anybody, and we'll get to that later. But I think moving around, and I think now Leela didn't fix that way. You could see Leela's house and my house was two different kind of houses. Mine, I hate clutter, so I never had a lot of stuff sick, and I still don't. But Leela did. And if she lost something, she worried about it, and independent. I think that, and I loved her dearly, but I think after her last husband died, she'd never pump gas in her car, never. And I said, well, how do you get it? And she said, oh, I just pull up and bat my eyes and say, I don't know how, and somebody pumps it. I said, well, I wouldn't ask anybody to pump gas for me. If I was the last, I'd run out of gas before I did that. And that was the difference. Just being independent, doing things yourself. And always have plan B ready, honey.
Okay, so we were at your school. You got your
I love
job.
school. I love school. It was very difficult in 1941 when we went into the war, and we were with the Germans and we were with the Japanese that had destroyed a lot of property, a lot of lives, and what the Germans did over in Europe were terrible. But if your ancestors are Germans, you're proud of them. But very few people were proud of Germans. There was only one other family in Birdville, and that was the Knapps, and ours was the Holzhausers. Well, you cannot, those last two names, honey, are German. And, well, they were calling us Krauts and Nazis, and and we didn't even know what Krauts and Nazis were. I mean, it was just, So I told Alphonse one day, I said, I'll tell you what, Alphonse, we're going to do. And he said, what? Because we had little siblings that were coming up that they were making fun of, and they didn't know why they were making fun of them, And I said, you're going to be a football hero. And, of course, what could a girl be but a cheerleader? I'll be a cheerleader and you'll be they'll kill us. And I said, well, but we'll survive. So they damn near killed Alphonse, but he did. He played football and I was cheerleader. And we had a ball. And I was secretary of the class. I was secretary of the student body. I had everything that I wanted, I'd get. And what's the matter?
That's Debbie. I was going to tell you.
Your phone's ringing.
Well, answer it.
What?
Let's get this show on the road.
Okay.
I'm in high school. Okay, then Jess lived 5 houses from me. And he went overseas, and then he came home, and in June the 3rd, 1945, Jess and I were married. But his ship had been damaged at Iwo Jima, and so they had brought it into Seattle for repair. So we went up to Seattle, and we were there 5 days in Seattle, and he was shipped back out. But we were in it was the first time I'd ever been away from home in my life by myself. And and I found out a little secret then. You could get to the West Coast, no problem. Coming back from the West Coast was where the problem was. And so Jess was, I had this tooth and it was bothering me. And then my face swelled up and I had to have it pulled. And he said, come back every day for 5 days. And I went back to the hotel and he had given me some pain pills and stuff. And Jess was there saying, I got to get back on ship. We're shipping out. I thought, well, I'm not staying here. So I go to get my ticket and get on. Couldn't get on. Servicemen and their families only. Well, I didn't have a serviceman. That is when I found out when you're out on the West Coast, you buy a ticket to the next station, next town, and you just keep buying it to the next town till you get to El Paso. You get to El Paso, you buy the ticket to Fort Worth, and you got it made. And so took me 4 days to get to El Paso. Just sitting in thing, and it was.
Yeah, tell me what were you telling me yesterday, that story about being in San Francisco, and you went to Viejo?
Well, now that was another time. Okay, so Jess was on a transport. He was on the USS Napa, 157, and what happened was he would pick up the Marines and the sailors and soldiers and take them to the islands. Jess drove the little amphibious boats that brought the soldiers and things to the thing. It was a very dangerous job. Anyway, that's what he did. And then when he was coming back to San Francisco, and he was going to be there, I think, a week. And they were picking up more, and they had to do some more repairs on their ship. Jesse's ship was rammed by another American ship at Iwo Jima. And so they brought it in slowly to San Francisco for repair. And this was in 45. It was after we were married, and it was in 45. And I went out there, it was in December. And they moved the ship then to Vallejo right out of San Francisco. And that we stayed in this beautiful hotel. It was just beautiful. And Bob Crosby, Bing Crosby's brother, was an orchestra leader, and he was there. And we danced till about 2 o'clock in the morning and went on up to our room, and his buddy got drunk. The Marines spiked his drinks, and he was just wallering a bat. And told of their great adventures overseas, and his wife was crying, going to leave him. And on the way back, Jess said, well, does this mean you're going to leave me? And I said, no, I'm going to make your life miserable. And I think I pretty well did that. Anyway, we stayed there. And so years later, Jess and I went to Hawaii. We came back through San Francisco, and we decided we'd go to Vallejo. And at the time we were there in 45, you couldn't walk the streets. It was so crowded, and the hotel was crowded. We had rented this car and drove to Vallejo. It's just right out of San Francisco. There wasn't a soul on that street. I mean, there wasn't a car moving. And Jess said, what do you think? And some of the buildings were boarded up, and we got to this hotel. And we parked the car, and we were going to go in and see what the difference was. They wouldn't let us in because it turned in being not a retirement center, but it said old folks home. And she looked at me. So that was our trip back. And okay, what else do you want to know?
Okay, and then so was it hard to have him away in the war when you first got married, or?
I'm a different kind of person, honey, than anyone you'll ever know. I had a ball. I mean, I never ratted on Jess. I can tell you honestly, I never did. But we stayed. I worked, and I went to college, and I took courses. And then one time, all our boys were gone. So I was working at Stripling's, and I was made over the credit department at Stripling's, 19 years old, and I was head of the credit department, okaying charges on a board, you know, and because the man that was that had left, and there wasn't, you know, and I had been there a few weeks, I think, is all I'd been there. But anyway, so I was there, and we would go, and Florence and I and Nell would go to the movies, and we went to USO dances. Now, you couldn't leave with any of them. You just went to they bus you out there, you dance with them, and then they bring you back, and you could not leave with them. And but this friend of mine left, and I said, "Where? You can't do that." Yeah. Well, she did, and she turned out pregnant, and she had her son, and he was shipped to overseas, and she never heard from him again. That was a good lesson for her to learn. And but no, we had a pretty good time. But it came out that they needed Western Union needed teletype operators. $18.95 a week you could get to learn. So you went Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I was going to Texas Wesleyan on Tuesday and Thursday because I just kept my life busy. So we went there, got through, you know, and you had to Morse code, you had to learn all that. And so we were doing real good. They were going to send me to New York, and they were going to send her to Africa. I said, she started crying. She said, when are we going to tell them? What are we going to tell them? We just came for the money. And I said, well, I'll tell them, you know. And I said, hey, I want to tell you something. You're just not going to be happy at all, but we just came for the money. And left. It's a wonder they didn't throw us in jail. But it was a 6-week course, and it was very interesting. You know, I could have gone to New York, and that's what I should have done. Oh, well.
What happened to those teletype skills?
I know. Don't you know they could have killed us? We signed a thing saying we'd go. So what are you going to do to us? Just to fight them down to the...
So then you just kept working at Stripling's, and then what were you studying in school?
Business. Still, I wasn't getting the money that this guy was getting when he was manager of the credit department. And women could not work when they were pregnant. That was just sinful. Well, what happened, Jess came home. I got pregnant with Kathy, and he hadn't come home. And I worked until I was 8 months pregnant with Kathy, and he came home. I guess I'd have worked till I was 9 months pregnant with him. But he came home, and the minute the boy or the man would come home, he could have his job back, and whoever was the woman was, you're out. I mean, they didn't give you a week. You knew that. And I just hung on longer than anybody else.
And so then, did you quit working?
Yes.
For how long?
I see, Kathy was, I guess, I didn't work till after Susan was born.
And did that make you...
Very angry when I went to work and couldn't make the money that the others were making.
But did it make you, were you frustrated? Did you like being a housewife, or did you not like being a housewife?
I like being a housewife. I like shaking those rugs and cleaning the house and keeping it straight and having 2 kids and waiting on them hand and foot, going somewhere, and I did all the work, and, you know, Jess didn't have to do a damn thing, and that wasn't right. It was not right. And, you know, but that's the way it was. They said, well, it's not the way my world is. So.
When did you put your foot down?
So one thing led to the other, and I went to work at Boland's. I went to work in an office, and I was making $30 a week. And that was good money for a female because of my history at Stripling's, which was good history. And but one day I went by with Sue Byers, my very best friend, and we went in on a Saturday to the toy store. And I said, boy, you got a mess here. And because we'd been buying them, and he said, well, what are you going to do about it? And I said, well, I think I'm going to come to work for you. And I said, I tell you what. He said, I can't hire you. I said, I tell you what, I only want $1 an hour. He said, $1 an hour. And I said, yeah. And I tell you else what I want. I want 10% of gross over last year. You've only had this toy store a year. I want 10% over what you did when I start working, what you did the year before. That's all I want. Well, hell, honey, you think I didn't get pulled? I mean, that's how the kids went to college. I mean, I made terrific money at Boland's. I really did. And I loved it. I really did.
And how was he to work with?
Well, he told me he learned a lot from me, and I learned a lot from him. He went to A&M, so there you are. You got to figure that in. And he said,
I don't know what you mean by that.
well, do you know about Texas A&M? They're all chauvinists, honey. They're just a big mess. And he knew what his life was. His wife did what he told her to. That was. I said, I think that's real charming. Anyway, he said a woman couldn't work but 5 days a week. That they could not work 6. I didn't want to work 6. I said, what do you mean a woman can't work 6 days a week? He said, that's all you can work. I took him to the labor board. He said, I can fire you. And I said, no, you won't. I'll quit before you fire me. So then I won. I could work 6 days a week. He said, well, when are y'all see you Saturday? I said, I'm not working 6 days a week. He said, what? I said, I didn't say I was going to do it. I said, if I wanted to, I could do it. That was our first. And I don't know why Bob always put up with me, because, I bucked him from the time I came in and went to work with him, and, but he let me buck him. That was the difference. And there was something else. One other thing. Oh, we started getting Hallmark shops, and I was going into all the Hallmark shops. Well, he needed a general manager. So he was going to make John Besdick, who was bike repair, because he was a man. I just called the May system in. They gave us all tests and everything, and that's when I got to be general manager.
Oh, over how many stores?
I guess at the time we probably had 5 at the time. It was fun. It was always fun. Then we started in on the sequel rights in the 60s came up. And Sarah T. Hughes was the attorney that swore Johnson in when Kennedy was shot in Dallas. She was a friend of mine. And so she called one day and said, guess what, Lou? And old Bob was really impressed with her, because she was, she was a pretty strong person. And she said, we're going to Rice Hotel in Houston, Texas. There's not Rice Hotel anymore. And we're going to go for equal rights amendment. Let's go. So we did, and we won. And Texas ratified, and we had to have 5 states that ratified before we could go into the equal rights. We finally got the 5, and that's when then all of a sudden here came pro-choice, and pro-choice came in. Well, I was on the board for Planned Parenthood, and I served on the board about 3 years, and then I don't remember, something happened. I think I moved to Granbury, I believe it was. Anyway, then we went to Washington and marched with 700 people with my niece Jana for pro-choice. And we won. And I think the one thing, after I went to Granbury, and I loved Granbury, I had a wonderful adventure in Granbury, and I love adventures. And it was wonderful there. I had a good partner, Mary Lou Watkins, and we had 3 stores, and we did real good on all 3. We had the Nutshell, the Nut House dining room. That Nuts were a family name, and then we put in the Cuckoo's Nest, which was crepes and steak, and it was, and we did the decor, and it's still that way. We went around to different where they'd have airs, there's sale.
State sales.
State sales, and we'd pick up silverware and put them on the table, and yeah, we had a good time there.